Good morning and welcome. Welcome especially to the children among us. It's a real blessing for us this morning. My name is Reverend Kate Wilkinson, and I welcome you here. So glad to see you and to be warm together. Isn't that a special feeling these days? Please join me now in a spirit of meditation and prayer. As we are now in the heart of the season of Lent, which in the Christian tradition is a season of penance, reflection, and fasting leading up to Easter Sunday, I offer this Lenten meditation by UU minister John B. Wolfe. I invite you to close your eyes if that is comfortable to you. Breathe deeply and release your breath freely as I read these lines. Fast from criticism and feast on praise. Fast from self-pity and feast on joy. Fast from ill temper and feast on peace. Fast from resentment and feast on contentment. Fast from jealousy and feast on love. Fast from pride and feast on humility. Fast from selfishness and feast on service. Fast from fear and feast on faith. May it be so. Amen. There's an excerpt from Traveling Mercies by Anne Lamott. Broken things have been on my mind lately because so much has broken in my life this year and in the lives of the people I love. Hearts, health, confidence. Our wonderful friend Ken Nelson died of AIDS just the other day, and that was terribly painful. Then, not long after, my old friend Mimi, the mother of my junior doubles partner B, began to die after a long struggle with a rare blood disease. Our preacher, Veronica, said recently that this is life's nature, that lives and hearts get broken, those of people we love, those of people we'll never meet. She said that the world sometimes feels like the waiting room of the emergency ward, and that we, who are more or less okay for now, need to take the tenderest possible care of the more wounded people in the waiting room until the healer comes. You sit with people, she said. You bring them juice and graham crackers. And then she went on vacation. Traveling Mercies, the old people at our church said to her when she left. That is what they always say when one of us goes off for a while. Traveling Mercies. Love the journey. God is with you. Come home safe and sound. Besides the big brokenness, I've noticed all sorts of really dumb things breaking lately, too. I've had a dozen calls from friends reporting broken cars, water heaters, a window, even a finger. So I've been on the lookout for something wonderful to happen because of the story I recently heard. Carolyn Miss, the medical intuitive who writes and lectures about why people don't heal, flew to Russia a few years ago to give some lectures. Everything that could go wrong did. Flights were canceled or overbooked, connections missed, her reserved room at the hotel given to someone else. She kept trying to be a good sport, but finally, 2 mornings later, on the train to her conference on healing, she began to whine at the man sitting beside her about how infuriating her journey had been thus far. It turned out that this man worked for the Dalai Lama. Don't you hate it when that happens? This man worked for the Dalai Lama, and he said, gently, that they believe when a lot of things start going wrong all at once, it is to protect something big and lovely that is trying to get itself born. And that this something needs for you to be distracted so that it can be born as perfectly as possible. I've invited a colleague of mine to preach here on class and classism later this month. So it's with some trepidation that I preached this morning's sermon about lessons learned traveling. I feel like I might get a lot of emails on March 22nd about what a classist sermon topic this is, and I suppose it might be. But I'll tell you up front that the first lesson learned from traveling that I want to share with you was inspired by the feelings of claustrophobia I would often experience on packed subway cars during rush hour in the many years that I lived in Boston without a car. There are, after all kinds of travel. And I'll also say up front that although many of my lessons learned from traveling may begin with whining, I hope none of you work for the Dalai Lama. I do speak with a heart full of gratitude for the opportunities I've had to travel, and with special gratitude this morning for this congregation who provided me with the incredible opportunity to go to California last month for a UU Ministers Conference. I had never been to California before, and it was amazing, and so I am deeply grateful. Okay, there are my disclaimers out of the way. Now I can continue with 5 lessons I've learned from traveling. Lesson number 1, it's important to get away. This winter especially, I have been convinced that a change of environment can do wonders for the soul. A trip can't fix everything, of course. There is that wise old saying, everywhere you go, there you are. But a change of location can do a lot to shift your thinking. Stress is a little easier to let go of with some miles behind you. A little time and space away can be extremely healing. But for those of us who are not able to physically change locations, that doesn't mean that this lesson does not apply. Go back with me for a moment to that crowded subway car. It wasn't like I had another way to get to work. Taxis weren't an option. Neither was waiting until 11 a.m. when transportation was less crowded. But in the crush of the crowd, when panic began to creep up on me, I had to get away. And I did so through visual meditation. It became a powerful way to escape, a tool that I have used ever since when I need to lower stress or regain center. And I think I've shared with you before that my visual meditation of choice, even way back then, was actually an escape to Provincetown. It was a memory that I practiced conjuring up until it was so vivid I could feel the sand between my toes. I would picture myself sitting on the beach in the east end of Provincetown, looking out over the sparkling harbor on a sunny day. That vision got me through many commuting hours. And that is when I first learned it's good to get away. So let's practice that right now. We happen to be in one of the spots that helps us to get away, but still, let's practice escaping. Let's picture ourselves somewhere warm, somewhere sunny. Close your eyes for a moment and just picture that warm spot. Feel the sun on your face. Listen to the sounds around you. Relax into that place. And when you're ready, come back. Really, come back. That was here. Isn't it good to get away? Are you ready for lesson number 2? Lesson number 2, duct tape doesn't fix everything. One of my trips this winter was particularly frustrating. At the heart of this frustration was a plane delay that caused us to miss our next flight and to be put on a series of flights rather than a direct flight to our final destination. And here's what happened. We were actually on the plane when the pilot came over the loudspeaker and told us that he was sorry, but there was going to be a delay while we assess whether the plane is airworthy or not. Now, in my humble opinion, that is something that a pilot should just never say to the people on a plane. Am I right? Then, to make things worse, he starts explaining to us what the mechanical issue is. The such and such is coming apart from the such and such. I don't want to know that. But wait, it gets worse. Then he says, sometimes this can be fixed with tape. I'm not kidding. He follows this up with the reassurance that we won't take off if the tape doesn't fix the problem, because your safety is very important to us. For the next 45 minutes, I watch out the window as 2 men literally duct tape the wing of the plane. Okay, maybe it wasn't duct tape, but it was some kind of silver airplane tape, which they carefully put on and then smooth out with a little scraper to make it aerodynamic. This is important according to the pilot. When the men finish, the pilot comes on and says, "Okay, folks, we're good to go." Now here's what puzzles me. There are a couple hundred of us on the plane. At least a dozen of us have witnessed the duct taping. And yet we say nothing. Not a word. We are so tired of being trapped on the plane going nowhere that we are excited about it being deemed airworthy. Not one of us raises our hand to say, I'm not comfortable with this level of repair. Or, I'd actually like to get off. My choice to remain silent becomes even more absurd to me about 4 minutes after takeoff as I watch through the little porthole window as the carefully applied silver tape pulls off and shreds into a million pieces in the air. So perhaps lesson number 2 is more of a question for us to sit with. When do we speak up about personal safety? When do we trust that little voice inside of us that says, this doesn't feel right. What are the barriers that get in our way? Are we more apt to speak up in smaller groups with people we know if someone else does first? I remember my friend Leslie writing a story about going on a blind date. The man was late to pick her up. He drank too much, but continued driving them around. He took her to a party that it became clear they were not actually invited to. And my friend Leslie stayed through the whole date. She said she didn't want to be rude to the friend who had set them up. The next day, she talked to her friend on the phone. "First, he was an hour late to pick me up," she said. "Oh," said the friend, "I would never have gone with him then." Thankfully, Leslie made it home from that terrible date. Thankfully, that plane landed just fine. But why didn't my friend just say, "You know what, buddy, pull over. I'm getting out here"? Why did 200 of us risk our lives on a plane that may or may not be airworthy? I don't really know how to tell if a plane is airworthy. But in those situations when we feel unsafe, perhaps we do need to take that assessment into our own hands. Because you know, duct tape doesn't fix everything. And this segues nicely into lesson number 3, which is also about speaking up and using our voice. Lesson number 3. Being assertive is not the same thing as being a jerk. One of the reasons we are often hesitant to speak up about something or advocating for ourselves is that we don't want to come across as rude. We have all been taught, especially women, that it is selfish to put our needs forward. Even in this morning's meditation, I told you, fast from selfishness and feast on service, right? Some of us have learned this lesson so well that we sometimes think having any needs at all is selfish. But that's not what lesson number 3 says. Just before one of these recent storms, I was given an opportunity to practice being assertive without being a jerk. 2 days before my scheduled flight to California, I began watching the Weather Channel with a sinking heart. There, on the day of my scheduled flight, were the dreaded snowflake and wind and thunder icons. The day I was scheduled to fly out was the day of that huge blizzard. Not wanting to miss my entire conference, I spent the better part of a day on hold with the airline, trying to get an earlier flight out to California. A dozen of my colleagues were trying the same. We updated each other on Facebook as we waited on hold. As the day progressed, it became a lot easier to be assertive, but a lot harder not to be a jerk. I was proud of myself as I spoke calmly to the third ticket agent after yet another hour of being on hold. "I understand that you are not authorized to waive the ticket change fee, and that they have not updated your weather report as of yet," I said. "But is there someone there I can speak to who is authorized?" I'm happy to report that several agents later I was able to get an earlier flight with a bad weather waiver, and I arrived in California ahead of the storm. Some of my colleagues were not so lucky and ended up missing the whole thing. If I had been passive, I would have missed it too. I hope I can hold on to this fine balance the next time I am given a really bad table at a restaurant, a rusty bike at a rental shop, or not enough attention at a doctor's office. Having needs is not rude. Advocating for good service and care, as long as it is done with respect, is nothing to be ashamed of. I'm still learning this one. My fourth lesson learned is that Waiting is what we make of it. There's a lot of waiting involved in travel. Delays, layovers, timetables. It's enough to make you crazy if you are in the wrong frame of mind. The key here is to recognize that we have some power to create the right frame of mind. When I was a little girl, we flew to Florida a few times to visit my grandparents. The thing I remember most about waiting in airports was making gum wrapper chains with my sister. Do you remember those? You carefully fold the paper wrappers into little V's and then you fit them together into a growing chain. The waiting was part of the excitement of the journey. The waiting was creative and generative. As adults, we can still make gum wrapper chains. I mean, we can't literally because now the packaging for gum is all wrong. But we can figuratively. We can string together things that will make the waiting better. Snacks and a book, people watching, pen and paper, taking time to meditate, to be still, to talk to our travel companions. Everyone always seems stressed in an airport, but I noticed one airport where this wasn't the case. In the Charlotte airport, they have a whole corridor of real live trees with a long row of rocking chairs under them. The people sitting in these rocking chairs were the only people who didn't seem completely miserable. They actually looked relaxed, happy even. They too were waiting, but something about the rocking chairs and the trees helped them to change their frame of mind. And we are in charge of changing our frames of mind when we start getting testy, impatient, and bored. Lisa will attest that I'm still learning this one as well. Waiting is inevitable. Misery is optional. And now for the last one. Coming home from one of my recent trips, I found myself at luggage carousel 3, trying to distinguish my black suitcase from the hundreds of other identical black suitcases spinning around on the metal conveyor belt. And I was inspired to think of lesson number 5 of traveling. Number 5, know your baggage. When it's midnight and you've been traveling all day and you're tired and your generous brother-in-law who volunteered to pick you up has been circling gate B for the last half hour because there is no stopping or standing at the airport, it's important to know that your black suitcase has a zippered pouch on the front, that there are 2 lines down the back where the retractable handle fits in, and that there is a red plastic bow tied on the luggage tag left over from a trip when you were more organized and thought of such things. And in life, it is equally important to know your baggage, especially for those tired moments at the end of the day when you are not at your best. It's important to be in touch with the things that might push your buttons quickly because of your childhood, your your life experiences. It's important to know what your particular limits are, what situations you might need to excuse yourself from because they touch a little too close to home or bring up a painful memory for you. We do not all have to take on the world in the same way. Some of us are better suited to certain challenges than others. Knowing our own baggage helps us to decide what we are going to take on and what we are going to leave to someone else. Knowing our own baggage helps to protect ourselves and to protect others from ourselves. Traveling is hard. Living is hard. But we can navigate the world a little better when we recognize our baggage. And if these 5 lessons do not seem to be helping. If everything seems to be going wrong, flights are delayed and trains are missed and things keep breaking, maybe this is just the universe distracting us until something beautiful can be born. I want to end by sharing the rest of Anne Lamott's chapter from Traveling Mercies. She says, "Not long ago, a car I was leasing broke down irretrievably, and while trying to find a second-hand car, I rented a car which broke down 2 days later. I did not find this very inspiring," she confesses. "I did not look around to see what lovely thing was trying to get itself born. Still, I was a pretty good sport until out of nowhere it began to rain, and it rained and rained." Anne says that during that rainy spell, she purchased a new used car and had gone about 40 miles in it when it too broke down. She was on her way to say goodbye to Mimi, her friend's mother who was dying. At an intersection not far out of town, her car made an awful noise and just stopped. People began honking at her and swearing. "It would be hard to capture how I felt at that moment," she says. "It was a nightmare. Bad mind kicked in. Bad mind can't wait for this kind of opportunity. I told you so," bad mind says. "It whispers to me that I am doomed because I am such a loser." Her story continues as she finds someone to help, someone to tow the car, someone to fix the car. And then by the time she calls her friend to say she will be late, the friend tells her that her mom is very tired and maybe she should come another time. The chapter ends with Anne describing her visit to the dying woman a few days later. She lays down next to her and talks to her softly. She whispers, "Traveling Mercies," into her ear and says a prayer. And she and her friend tell Mimi that it is okay to go when she is ready. It's okay to let go. And she stays by her side until the woman takes her last breath. Now maybe you think it is arrogant or self-centered or ridiculous for me, Anne says, to believe that God bothered to wiggle a cheap bolt out of my new used car because he or she needed to keep me away for a few days until just the moment when my old friend most needed me to help her mother move into whatever comes next. Maybe nothing conscious helped to stall me so that I would be there when I could be most useful. Or maybe it did. I'll never know for sure. And anyway, it doesn't really matter. It was just such a blessing to have been there. Susan, we wish you traveling mercies and arrival graces. Amen, and blessed be.